In this series we're showing you how to keep your bike performing at its best. In this video we're going to look at your gear options and how you can tailor them to make your bike work best for you and your riding. We've enlisted Andrew from Cycle Surgery to show us what to do and why it matters.
Nothing's going to spoil your ride quite as much as gears that don't work properly, whether they're just rattling away on the back, not changing when you want them to, or the chain is dropping off. You need to have them working properly. And now we're going to look at how to set them up. The front derailleur has quite a simple job. All it does is move the chain from one chain ring to the other. First thing when you're setting it up, it needs to be the right height. It wants to be 1 to 3 millimeters above the largest chain ring, and it needs to be parallel to the chain ring. You can adjust it with this bolt here. If you're fitting a new derailleur, they come with these handy little labels, and you can see the correct height is indicated. So we're just going to drop this one down a little bit. To stop the chain from dropping off, the derailleur is fitted with 2 limit screws. These limit how far the derailleur moves when it's lifting the chain or dropping the chain from one chain ring to the other. To set the lower limit screw, we want the chain on the largest sprocket and the chain on the smallest chain ring. You want to adjust the derailleur so that the cage is as close as possible to the chain without actually rubbing on it. Generally, the lower limit screw is the one closest to the centre of the bike. And you turn it anti-clockwise to move the cage away from the chain, and clockwise to move it closer. To set the high limit screw, we need to put the chain on the largest chain ring and on the smallest sprocket. As you can hear, the chain is currently rubbing on the derailleur cage because there's not enough tension in the derailleur to hold the cage away. You can see there's plenty of movement there. So what we need to do is increase the tension in the cable to hold it in that position. Most bikes these days will have some form of adjustment for the cable tension. Traditionally, bikes had barrel adjusters down here, but these days most bikes, particularly carbon ones, will have a barrel adjuster within the cable. And you can see now the cage is no longer rubbing on the chain, so we can set this limit screw. If you turn this clockwise, the cage will move in towards the chain, and again you can hear it rubbing there. So we're just going to open it out a little bit. You want to open it out so the gap is approximately 0.5 millimeter. If the gap is too big, there's a danger the chain can come off the outside of the chain ring and drop down. As with the lower limit screw, the derailleur cage needs to be about 0.5 millimeter away from the chain. If you leave it too wide, there's the danger the chain can pop off the chain ring. Most shifters these days have a function called trim, so that as you move across the cassette, you can do a half shift on the front derailleur, which stops the chain from rubbing on the cage. If you put too much tension in the cable, you'll lose that trim function. So just give a quick check and make sure that you haven't put too much tension in. Now that we've got the front sorted, it's time to look at the back. After nearly 100 years of development, rear derailleurs work incredibly efficiently these days when they're set up properly, and that's what we're going to look at doing now. First thing, we're going to look at what Shimano called a B-tension screw. This controls the position of the derailleur and makes sure that the jockey wheel here doesn't come into contact with the sprockets. To start with, we're just going to push it up onto the largest sprocket. And what we want to do is adjust the screw so that the jockey wheel is as close to the sprocket as possible but isn't actually coming into contact with it, so that the chain is free to move. And then just drop it down onto the smallest sprocket and make sure it's all good there too. Plenty of room there for the chain to move freely. We're now going to look at setting the limit screws. These work in exactly the same way as the limit screws on the front derailleur and stop the chain from either going too far into the wheel or dropping off and getting caught between the cassette and the frame. Just to make sure that we're looking at the limit screws and the cable tension doesn't come into play, I'm actually going to release the cable now. And what we're just going to do is push the chain up onto that largest sprocket, and I'm going to hold it there with my hands. And what I'm looking for is that the chain over the largest sprocket down onto the jockey wheel is in a straight line. It's probably easiest to judge if you look at the gap between the chain and the second sprocket at the top and the bottom. And if the gap is the same, you know it's all nice and parallel. If you do need to adjust it, this is the lower limit screw. If you move it clockwise, it will move the chain towards the outside of the bike. If you turn it anti-clockwise, it will let the chain go further towards the centre of the bike. We're now going to look at adjusting the high limit screw. And again, what I'm doing is I'm looking to see that the chain is running in a straight line down off the sprocket onto the jockey wheel. And if I look here, I can see there's a slightly tighter gap at the bottom between the chain and the second sprocket than there is at the top. So I'm just going to open that a little bit. That is turn it anti-clockwise. There we go, it's running quietly, so that's always a good sign it's in the right place. We're now going to set the cable tension. A good starting point is if you push the chain up onto the second sprocket, pull the cable through. If I've got the cable tension right, it's going to be indexed and we'll move from one sprocket cleanly to the next. And you can hear it's a little bit noisy. It means it's not quite got enough tension to move it onto that sprocket cleanly. So I'm going to use the barrel adjuster to make some fine adjustments. And there, it's gone quiet. If you put too much tension in, the chain will be very reluctant to drop down onto the smaller sprockets. If you don't put enough tension in, it's going to be noisy as you move it onto the next larger sprocket because it hasn't quite got enough tension to hold it in the right place. So if you can put all that together, you shouldn't have any more problems with your gears. If you found this video useful, just hit like and subscribe for more.